Hello everybody and welcome back to another Kings of War tournament report. I'm Visibly Riley and today we have game 5 with my Ratkin versus some Ogres. So here is my opponent's list, the lovely Brian. He starts off with 3 hordes of siege breakers, one of whom have the caterpillar potion, then a horde of boomers, 2 regiments of chariots, a warlord on chariot with the banner of the griffin, an ASB with the diadem, a boomer sergeant with inspiring talisman, a red goblin big git with a flea bag and the blade of slashing, 2 giants, and of course the hell on wheels formation. I did enjoy Brian's list. I thought it was pretty good. I mean, you can't go wrong when you basically just mash hell on wheels together with siege breakers and boomers, right? So yeah, I think it's a great list. The scenario we ended up playing was push, and here is our deployment. So first off, let's start with the Ratkin deployment. From left to right, up there in the front, we have my 3 troops of scurriers with the assassin behind them. Then we have the first regiment of slaves. To the right of them, we have the Vermintide. To the right of them, we have 5 more regiments of slaves. And finally, we have the last regiment of slaves all the way on the right. Behind the center, we have the 2 hordes of shock troops. Wow, they look... I can't even really tell where one ends and one begins. But we have the 2 hordes of shock troops right next to each other. We have the weapon team, my warlock, and then lastly, the Blight. I think that my big rat demon is somewhere on the left. I'm pretty sure about that, but I'm not exactly. For the loot counters here, I'm not sure if this was a modified version of push or not, but we had no restrictions on units that could have the loot counters, so I put a loot counter on my Vermintide and then 2 on the shock troops, while my opponent puts a loot counter on his ASB, I want to say. Yeah, the ASB, one of the hordes of what are they, siege breakers, and then the last one I think is also on siege breakers. Yes, they're both on siege breakers. Originally he had them on those chariots on the right, forgetting that they knocked your speed down to 5, so he chose not to do that. So yeah, that's where our loot counters are. You're also supposed to have one in the center of the table. We forgot to put that out, so just keep that in mind. With my opponent's deployment, he had a lovely swamp ogre army. From left to right, we have a regiment of chariots. Then we have his warlord on chariot. Then we have the first horde of siege breakers. Then the boomers. To the right of that, the giant, the first giant at least. To the right of that is his boomer sergeant. And then we have the 2 hordes of the 2 remaining hordes of siege breakers with the second giant between them. The guys with the shields on their back that are to the right of his boomer sergeant, those are the ones with the caterpillar potion. To the right of that, we have his ASB, and then finally some chariots off there on the right. I think his deployment's okay. I'm not exactly sure what he could have done better here, but I actually think it's pretty good, and this is the reason. If you look at my deployment, I have a giant piece of rough terrain to the right of the Blight, then I have a forest, and then a piece of impassable. On the right side, we have another piece of impassable that makes it so no horde can walk from my side of the table without going into rough terrain or being nestled up to impassable. So considering the huge constraint that's being placed on me on where I can actually put my army on this table, I think my opponent deployed very well. So moving forward, we go to turn 1. So I get turn 1 and I sling and fire off some bolts at his at his chariots here, just hoping to get a lucky break because they're not inspired. I do not get a break, but I do get a waiver, so I feel pretty good about that. Yeah, my rat demon's definitely over there on the left somewhere. I'm not exactly sure. Otherwise, I move my army forward, at least as far forward as it can go, due to this just frankly awful terrain. But anyway, the ogres advance. They are slowed down by that random piece of river right there, but otherwise can move at a pretty decent pace. They've decided to just sort of keep a battle line. With the left-hand side, he has his warlord and his big git on Gator, just staring down my scurriers to keep them honest, which I think is fair. And turn 2. So turn 2 sees, I had a choice of my demon spawn charging into the chariot side wavered, but I decided it's too risky, because if I if I fail to break those chariots over there, the demon spawn is beyond useless. He gets charged by a warlord. He's out of position. Like there are just too many bad things that can happen. So instead, I decide that I'm going to shoot at those chariots and set up the flank. Otherwise, I move forward with some slaves in the center there to block up his siege breakers and maintain the battle line as far as I could. So you can see how this terrain is pretty bad, for me at least, because my shock troops in the lower left, I can't move them. I can't wheel to the left, or I could wheel to the left and do nothing. But if I wheel to the right, I'm stuck behind my own lines because I have a lot of units here, that's for sure. But this terrain doesn't even, like, you can't even fit a horde between the forest, the impassable piece of terrain, and this rough terrain on the side. There's just no way through it. So without Pathfinder, you can't move on this side of the table. But anyway, I'm going to attempt to. Over here, I make a mistake with my slaves. I don't know, I play Ogres too, so I don't know why I thought that the chariots were speed 7, probably a Warhammer holdover in my head. But yeah, I definitely think the chariots are speed 7, so when I advanced with my rats toward him last turn, I didn't realize that there was no way to advance out of his charge. I was just trying to bait him forward a little bit while holding him back, but there's no reason to do that this turn, so instead I just move forward. And over here we can see the right-hand side of the table that you've sort of you haven't seen in the pictures yet. That giant house is a very large piece of terrain that makes it so there's probably about a tenth of the table I can't set up on anyway due to this giant piece of impassable terrain. Then there's a wall to the left of it, which you know, without Strider or Pathfinder, or without Strider or Flight, can't use anyway. It's just a mess. And over here, yeah, we see Ogre turn 2. Or the end of shooting for me, I end up doing a crazy number of wounds. Like, it looks like that dies on a 12. I'm not sure if I did 9 wounds or not, but yeah, I do a crazy number of wounds to that chariot regiment over there and just pop it. So I'm feeling pretty good about what's happening right now. And we'll see with Ogre turn 2. Yeah, he sends from on the left, he sends his Goblin Big Git into my Scurriers. It is a hindered charge, but, you know, Then he sends Siege Breakers into Slaves, a Giant into Slaves. This was another one, if we roll a picture back here. Yeah, I I don't know why I wasn't thinking that Giants were speed 7. Or maybe I was thinking, I just was annoyed by the pieces of terrain and I moved into his charge range. But I definitely shouldn't have allowed the Giants to charge. They can, of course, and my opponent takes them, which is a good move. So he rolls his Giants forward into some Slaves, and then yeah, otherwise he just sort of, again, maintains his battle line. The Ogres in this case really don't want to meet me piecemeal. The Giants maybe, because they can take a punch and it's going to take me more than one round to get rid of them, especially due to the fact that I'm always going to be hindered. So I think he's just trying to set up a concerted effort, right? Once all these guys can get up, he will do some serious charges. So yeah. This is just showing off some shooting. I think it's his Boomer Sergeant shooting into my slaves and doing nothing. But then the other Boomers shoot my slaves and obliterate them. The Giant in front of my Blight obliterate those slaves as well. But the other Giant does like 2 wounds to slaves, which is always funny to see. So yeah, off there on the left, I'm not sure if his Siege Breakers are fought yet, but I know that his Goblin Big Git does not break my Scurriers. He just wavers them. So, and yes, the chariots off on the right, they have killed their slaves. I didn't take a lot of pictures of the right-hand flank. So here, yes, this is the end of the turn. So yeah, the Siege Breakers do kill off my slaves in front of them, and then the Big Git does 1 wound to my Scurriers, who are sitting on an 11-13 due to my Rat Demon, and yeah, they're still wavered. So, unfortunate for me. Turn 3. Turn 3 starts, and I basically shimmy my Scurriers back a little bit. I actually did a small rule snafu here, and what I was trying to do was get the Scurriers back and then twist them using their nimble, so I could charge with some Scurriers as well as my assassin or some slaves as well as my assassin into this Goblin Big Git. But instead what I do is completely mess up that movement while I'm trying to explain it. My opponent rightfully points out that what I'm doing is illegal, and I go, I really thought that I had a plan here, but it turns out that I did have a plan, I just couldn't remember it. So anyway, I do this. The Vermintide are making a run for his side of the table, just trying to get all the way in the corner. I don't need them to fight, I just need them to have a loot counter. And otherwise, yeah, my rat spawn has moved around. Some slaves have charged into the flank of some siege breakers just to make them mad and get in the way of his warlord. Although with nimble, you can probably get past me. And my blight get a charge into the giant, but again, they're hindered. So it's just I don't think I'm gonna do a whole lot there. The shock troops in the back there just try to reform. I can't move my slaves past my other shock troops because again, this forest makes it so I can't march with anything. So I just have nowhere to land. And yeah, this is the end of the turn. I do a wound, I want to say, or a couple wounds to his big git, and I believe waver him with my assassin, so that's good. I don't think I did anything with those slaves versus the siege breakers. That's not that unlikely. And then against the giant, I do a couple wounds, but I'm still hitting on 5s, so not the best chances there. Although I do land a Bane Chant, so there's that. And this is Ogre turn 3. So yeah, it looks like I also shot his warlord with a lightning bolt, probably from my demon spawn. Yeah, definitely from him. So and did 2 wounds, but it didn't do anything to him. The siege breakers countercharge against my slaves. The yes, the goblin bigot is in fact wavered over there, and the warlord decides to take this like little circuitous route around to charge my shock troops, and there's just the tiniest bit of felt in his charge, so it ends up being a hindered charge, and this forest is finally doing something for me, I guess. His giant goes back into the blight, seems good. And yeah, he opens fire with his boomers and boomer sergeant onto my weapon team, which I believe moved forward to shoot at his boomer sergeant. Let's roll a picture back real quick. I open fired on his boomers, but I didn't do terribly well with it. So yeah, anyway, so his boomer sergeant and boomers open fire. They do 5 wounds to me, get the waiver, so that's good for him. And his giant ends up doing 4 wounds to the blight. That's not the best. And otherwise, yeah, I think that his oh yeah, this showing the chariots rolling around. That's that flank. We're about done with seeing any more pictures on the right flank. Yeah, just showing off the shots. The giant ends up doing 4 wounds to my blight, and up there, the siege breakers kill off those slaves. So now they're just facing down the piles of scurriers and 1 more slaves and the demon spawn. The one thing I would say, I don't think my opponent did a great job of here was why charge with the giant into my blight. It just makes it so I can do a counter charge on a 4+, and it's unlikely that the giant will actually do anything. But with how strong his side is, the right flank is for him, maybe it just doesn't matter. So his giant killed off my slaves on the right finally, and just come over here to join the party. And turn 4. So turn 4 sees my shock troops and demon spawn go into his warlord. The demon spawn has a flank charge. And they just obliterate him. I go back into the giant, and unfortunately I just roll pretty poorly here. So I have 30 attacks. I hit on a 4+ due to it being a counter charge. I do have Bane Chant on me. So it's 4s and 4s, and I do 3 wounds. So yeah. I needed something a bit better there as I'm facing down all those siege breakers and another giant. But I don't get it. Some scurriers move forward to block up his siege breakers in the top left there, and I send my assassin back into his goblin bigot just to try to finish it off. At the end of the turn, I don't kill off the goblin bigot, and in fact, I believe I double won the nerve check on him because he's not even wavered. Which is pretty funny. It begins this weird duel between the assassin and that alligator guy. But yeah, on the ogre turn here, I think the alligator guy goes into the bigot goes into my assassin. The siege breakers go into some scurriers, and then the boomer sergeant goes into my shock troops. That's a good idea to block off any potential flank charges. And his boomers could charge the front of my demon spawn, but they choose to instead just get some shots on him. Or maybe they couldn't. Let's roll a picture back. Yeah, they can't actually see him, so that's why they didn't charge. So yeah, they're just going to do some shots onto him. and then everything charges the Blight. There was a really close call here with the Giant in the flank of the Blight, and my opponent and I 4+ in the end because it was exactly on that line, so we just couldn't figure it out. We 4+ it. He won the roll. Giant went into my flank, which is probably the end of the Blight. I can't imagine. Well, if he went into the front, I'm not sure he could actually fit. So it did do something, I guess. Otherwise, that's about all he has. So yeah, the Siege Breakers do 11 wounds to my Scurriers, but they roll that double 1. So pretty funny there, they didn't get them away. And over here, this is what happens to the Blight in the end. He just blows through them. It's the Siege Breakers, one of the Giants, turned to face my Shock Troops, while the other Giant just decides to move forward. And here we see, yeah, just end of turn shot, I guess. Yep, he did 2 wounds to my Demon Spawn with his boomers, but not too many. Too many. So 5. Turn 5 here sees the Ratkin. I don't have a whole lot I can do in terms of effective maneuvers here. So instead of pushing too hard, this looks like before movement though. Let's yeah, definitely. So yes, his I go back into the little gator guy. I guess I did waver him last turn. I go back into the little gator guy with my assassin. Then I combo charge the Siege Breakers with some slaves and the double 1 Scurriers, just because they can't shoot anyway. I send my Shock Troops into the front of the boomers, just because not a whole lot else I can do. I fly my Demon Spawn up to rain hell upon him. And then otherwise I just sort of move a weapon team forward to block a charge maybe. I'm just really gummed up by this terrain and my army. The mixture of the two not going well. So the end of combat, my assassin finally finishes off his little gator dude. Yeah, he did charge me last turn, just didn't hurt me. So my assassin finishes off the little gator dude. That feels good. Then I do 3 wounds to the Siege Breakers with my slaves and Scurriers, so that's just comedy gold there. I try to shoot down these boomers again with some lightning bolt, but it just doesn't stick. And I do manage to shoot down a giant using my weapon team, I believe. Yeah. So at least there's that. I did finish off that giant. It was already on 9 wounds, so it's not the most unlikely. And I had some lightning bolts to back it up if the weapon team failed. But I'm staring down a lot of units on on my Shock Troops, which is really unfortunate. This is a big mistake I made this game. I can't believe I did this. Just total mind fart. My Shock Troops should have just dropped their token, right? I should have had these slaves that are behind the Shock Troops and then the other Shock Troops. Had these slaves behind the Shock Troops just back up a little bit, drop the token onto them, and then he can't actually get to it. But I don't do that, so we move forward, and everything charges into these guys, just everything. He gets his Siege Breakers, double Siege Breakers, and I can't even tell if the Giants have it. Oh, no. Giants over there bugging my Shock Troops. He gets his Siege Breakers in there. He gets his Boomers to shoot into my Demon Spawn. It's just, all over the place. These Siege Breakers, it looks like this is after his turn. Yeah, he's killed off my Scurriers with a Breath Attack, I believe, from the Diadem. And then he killed off my slaves with his Siege Breakers. And this is, yep, and then he gets those Shock Troops. I mean, that's pretty likely. I mean, that's a lot of Siege Breakers attacks into Shock Troops. So not that surprised there. And that ends up being the end of game. Actually, let's roll a picture back. So that ends up being the end of the game with my opponent having all 3 of his loot tokens. I didn't actually take any of them away from him, and I've lost 2 of them, or 1 of mine. He has 2 of his in my side of the board, I believe. Maybe it's only 1 is on my side. It doesn't really matter. So it ends up being I have 1 on his side and 1 on my side. So I have 3 points, and then he has, I believe, 1 on my side and 2 straddling the middle line because of where the ASB and last unit of Siege Breakers ended up being. So he ends up getting a 4-3 victory. Again, we ignored the center objective, and then so yeah, he ends up getting a 4-3, and our victory point difference is It is not even 100 points. We are really close just because a lot of my units just, they're not dead and they're just off doing nothing, like these shock troops over here. We decided not to roll that giant versus the shock troops. I'm sure you could have heard him, but he couldn't break them, even with max attacks. So we just don't roll it. So anyway, here is a short picture of the way I saw this table when I walked over. So yeah, you can see that house over there with the on the right, not over there, on the right with that long piece of terrain, the little hedge there, next to a hill, next to a river, next to a hill, next to a wall, right? That side of the table, you can't actually. There's line of sight for like maybe one thing of archers to see through for maybe a fifth of the table. Then on my side of the table, I have from left to right that little snow piece. That's an impassable, the whole thing. Then the center little felt cutout, oblong shape. That is a forest, and then this bottom one isn't actually a forest. It's flat terrain, but it is enormous. It's like good 6-7 inches. Same thing with the hill that's over there. And when I walked over, I'm like, is this a forest? Because he has a forest over there, and we're like, oh no, someone just moved the trees. But I don't know. Maybe it's a problem with my list building. I'll definitely in the future, as this is the regular terrain that we have up here. In the future, I will be running lists that have less of a weakness versus versus this amount of rough terrain. But yeah, this just seemed overkill to me. Not to say that that's the reason for my loss. I think Brian simply outplayed me. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed the game, and I'll see you next time. Before I leave, now I'm at 1 win, 2 draws, and 2 losses. Yeah, so I am not doing too well. Anyway, see you for the last game next time.